This is Cast of Wonders, the young adult fiction podcast featuring stories of the fantastic. Welcome. Episode 540. I'm Catherine Inskip, your editor and host. Our story for today is That Good Night by Francesco Rey, a Cast of Wonders original. Francesco is a student at the University of Chicago hoping to pursue a PhD in philosophy of religion. In his free time, he loves learning languages, memorising poetry, and watching heartwarming movies with his friends. As a transgender Catholic author, he hopes to incorporate elements of both religion and queer identity into his writing. This is his first publication. This story is narrated by Jerris Durnett. Jerris Durnett is a narrator and skeptic from the Chicagoland area, but really, he's an everyman, just a regular guy trying to muddle through life one day at a time. So, in a sense, aren't we all, Jerris? This story comes with a content warning for bereavement. And now, we've a tale to tell.
That Good Night by Francesco Rey. This is how the old pass, like fog on a sunny summer day, like a gray cirrus cloud fading before the pearly moon, like a brush of cold wind on a starry night, like a snowflake melting upon a window pane. They pass in the night silent, with a single peaceful breath. They pass in hospital beds amid beeping machines, with the rattle of oxygen shaking free from their chests. They pass with families around them, with aged spouses clasping their hands, or they pass alone, with no one at all. They pass and they enter the Shadowlands, and no matter who is with them when they pass, this final step they take alone. They enter the Shadowlands alone. They stride its craggy shore, they sail their coracles past the moonlit sky, and they do not return. This is how the old pass. This is how I wanted my grandmother to pass. On a summer day, with buttery sunshine stroking the green hills, on a red checkered blanket with a bowl of strawberries glimmering nearby, warmth on her face and springy grass beneath her hands, and a light, playful wind rustling her hair. Her husband's voice in the distance, murmuring about good weather for kite flying. Her son's voice saying that they should visit the beach next week. My voice somewhere near, too. This is how my grandmother passed. On a cold, lonely December night, with snow pattering on the hillside by her house, on a single, solitary bed smelling of dust, the broken heater buzzing by her face and the alarm clock glinting a menacing red and the scratchy blankets clawing up her arms. Her husband's ragged breaths sounded nearby, tangled up in a nightmare. My voice nowhere near at all. Far away because I was far away, because I had not called her that evening like I was supposed to. I was supposed to call her the evening before she died, and I didn't. Why didn't I call her? This is how my grandmother passed, solitary, unobserved, my grandfather finding her corpse, still and cold in the morning, her soul already departed for the Shadowlands. She passed alone, and she passed unnoticed, and now she is gone, and she will never, ever come back. I'm not a good grandchild, to be clear. I missed that call with my grandmother because of a party at university. Not even a good party, just a bunch of bored second-years drinking beer in a dark room, spouting lines robbed from our Shadowland Studies professors in an effort to look clever. I knew I had to call her, but I figured postponing it wouldn't hurt. I postponed a lot of calls. She was a good grandmother, though. She and my grandfather lived in a little white house in the ruin-studded hinterlands, one of those solitary, past-soaked places where the boundary between life and the Shadowlands is fluid. Visiting on summer nights, I sometimes glimpsed ghosts on far hillsides, glimmering a luminous blue. They slipped out of the old white dome in the woods, which she told me used to be an ancient temple. That dome was a portal. If you leaned deep into it, you could almost hear the lapping of the waves, carrying those souls ready to leave the Shadowlands on their final destination, heaven or nirvana or oblivion whatever you believe. My father always said, usually with a disgusted shiver, that only a fool would choose to live in a ghost-soaked region. If so, my grandparents were such brave fools. We visited them every summer, my parents and I. My father would sit in the living room making noises about his latest article, while my grandfather, who hadn't gone to college, grunted. I lingered in the kitchen where my grandmother's hands dug deep into bread dough. She kneaded and yanked and pushed and pulled, stretched that dough with all the strength in her little bird-like body. She'd catch me looking and flash me a smile. "You goose," she said. She liked that word. "Don't get hungry yet. You've got a few hours yet before it'll be ready." And then, in a few hours, it was indeed ready. Hot bread, fresh from the oven, I'd slather it in honey and butter, grinning at her, maybe saying thanks if I remembered. I didn't always remember. She'd lean back against the oven, arms crossed, nodding with pride. "Best wheat bread in the whole hinterlands," she'd say. "You know, a machine would be faster," my father once said. I might have been 15 at the time, an angsty adolescent slouching everywhere in a black hoodie. Even so, I flared up at him for that. I understood the truth. My grandmother's bread meant everything. For years, she had baked that bread for me. She baked it despite osteoporosis, despite the chronic burning pain, which wreaked havoc on her arms and legs and must have been kneading the dough an agony. She baked it with a smile. She baked it until the last 2 years when the bed claimed her, and she couldn't conceal the black moods of melancholy which so often overcame her. But until then, for me, she baked bread. My mother told me not to come to the funeral. "You have exams," she said, "classes. Your grandmother would want you to succeed." "Is it really my exams?" I said, "or is it Dad?" My mother's breath crackled on the other side of the phone. "He loves you," she said at last. "It's just, this is a hard time for him." I could have said a lot of things to that. It had been a hard time 6 months ago when he had snapped at me over dinner for my choice of study. It had been a hard time over a year ago when he had shouted at me for letting my little brothers see my textbooks. It had been a hard time a year and a half ago when he had glowered all through my high school graduation. It was always a hard time for him. "I got it," I said instead, and what else was I supposed to say? His mother had just died. How would it make things any better for me to force myself into things? "It wasn't easy for him growing up, you know," my mother said. I hung up. For half an hour I sat in my room alone, the white walls and the whispers of old quarrels uniting to clamp shut around me like teeth. What was so wrong with studying the Shadowlands? Why couldn't he show the slightest appreciation for my studies, the languages I'd learned, the religious texts I'd poured through? Even the times, brief, exhilarating times in a class group, I'd crawled through portals to the other side. But all of this was merely a distraction, a rehash of old anger I'd long since forgotten. The real truth pierced through me like a needle. I hadn't called my grandmother the night before she died, and now I was missing her funeral. I could have pretended nothing had happened. Everyone's grandparents died, and everyone dealt with it. They moved on. Why should I make a big deal out of my particular loss? Perhaps I could have done that, if I had been someone else, somewhere else, but I was me, a researcher perplexed with the afterlife. I had a motive, the sour milk smell of my own guilt goading me like a whip. Finally, my location was ripe for trouble. This gives me no absolution, merely an explanation. The boundary between life and the Shadowlands is fluid in many places. Universities, especially old ones like mine, have their own ghosts, and ghosts, restless souls unwilling to set sail from the Shadowlands shores, are drawn to the scent of death. They slip out of ivy-covered alcoves and gothic gargoyles. They blink in and out like lighthouses on the main quad at night. They fix their glowing eyes upon you. Where the boundary is fluid, where ghosts appear, a portal must be close too, like the temple by my grandma's house. A portal through which you can glimpse the shores of the Shadowlands. A portal through which maybe you can climb through. My grandmother was what they called a free spirit. She smoked marijuana as a college student. She wrote a short story about it, which I found in my father's cabinet as a teenager. She had grown up in a strict Irish Catholic family, and the weed, along with the degree from Cornell in Shadowland Studies and the choice to set up a farm with her giant, gentle husband in the hinterlands, were a kind of rebellion against her family's norms. She and my grandfather shared a gorgeous gossamer dream about that farm. Fields of corn far as the eye can see, strawberries red and plump in the sunshine, maybe a few cows grazing contented in verdant pastures. They wanted that farm to last for generations. They pictured themselves and their kin as stewards of the soil. Stewards, perhaps, of the saddened souls which roamed that land. Everyone and everything existed miles and miles away. My grandparents spent their married life alone in as rural a place as rural can get, a place so far from the city lights that when you gazed up on a cloudless night, the stars blazed out like a tapestry of torches before you. An ideal location, this place, to interact with the dead, to build New Age altars in the hilltops and leave fresh bread by the portal to the underworld, to close your eyes and stand in the velvety night and wait for the cool water fluidity that suggests the presence of a being long past, a place rich in history and dreams. My grandparents' farm, but not a place rich in the living. A farm which lasts for generations, depends on successful planting and the striving of children. The planting struggled in the rocky, half-frozen hinterland fields. There were to be no cornfields and no strawberries, and at last no cows. The souls of the dead could not till their barren fields, and my grandparents' only child, my father, strived for other things. The only childhood photo I've seen of him depicts a gangly, bespectacled youth, head ducked away from the camera, away from my beaming grandmother. He never took to weeding fields or furnishing makeshift altars. He preferred books to branches and organized religion to outlandish rituals. The stars were not enough for him. He needed the busy blaze of city lights, the company of quick-minded peers. He wanted something, anything, other than the endless expeditions into the murky darkness. The stars were not enough for him. He needed the busy blaze of city lights, the company of quick-minded peers. He wanted something, anything, other than the endless expeditions into the murky darkness. The terrible nights I'd only heard hinted about, where my intrepid grandmother dragged him along to risky experimental trips to the Shadowlands. My father wanted to escape. He taught himself ancient Greek. He got a full scholarship to an Ivy, converted to Catholicism, and didn't look back. The dream of the farm aged and passed, as the old pass, fading out, until it became an ethereal wisp, then nothing at all. My grandparents never spoke of it to me. I only heard of it secondhand from my father. He was bitter about the pressure they'd put him under, the sense he had always had that they didn't want him to live the life he'd chosen. I believe my grandparents sensed my father's life was for me, too. However much I loved the quiet timelessness of their house and the dusty smell of history, I always was drawn in the end like a moth to a candle to the excitement of the world, to libraries and research institutions and the distance analysis of eerie data collected by adventurers. I always wanted to leave them. Even when with them, I was almost always absent. You need memories to enter the Shadowlands. You also need courage and a closeness to death, to someone already lingering in the twilight, half departed from the world already. To find a particular dead soul within the Shadowlands, you need even more than that. You need something of theirs they cared for, something soaked through with their striving. You need something they can consume, imbibe, make part of them, something which can drag them into the painful wringing of corporeality. You are not just trying to catch a ghost blue glimmer of them after all. If you've gone so far as to dive into the Shadowlands to find them, you want a conversation at least. In my case, a chance to apologize, a chance to atone, a chance to grant my grandmother the sort of peaceful passing she deserved. I needed my grandmother's bread. I didn't have the recipe. I spent 2 days searching the internet, another day combing through my inbox, examining every message from my mother, from my grandfather, from my grandmother. Far too many messages I'd received but not responded to. The bread recipe didn't surface anywhere. On the 4th day, the day before my grandmother's funeral, I called my father. The tuition payment should have already gone through, he said on the other side of the phone. I'm not, calling about that, I said. A pause in which I waited for him to snap at me or hang up. How are your classes going? He asked instead. For the next 10 minutes, I told him all about my Gen Ed classes, about the hyperactive young professor who taught my English class and the old foul-mouthed Scot who taught my physics class, about my Kant-quoting classmate who always wore a suit and my solitaire expert pupil who invariably showed up 15 minutes late in pajamas, about everything and nothing, all the little details safe enough to communicate. And Dad listened. He listened, and he asked questions, and in the upward tilt of his voice, I could almost see his smile. At last, on the other side of the phone, he sighed. Well, it's getting close to dinner time. Your mother is a bit busy. I'd better get off, but thank you for calling. Dad. A pause. Are you all right? I asked. I swallowed in the crackly silence, waiting for the abruptness of anger. Don't worry, he said instead. Just focus on your classes, the good ones. He couldn't even give me a proper answer. He couldn't even talk to me without criticizing my major choice. That flash of anger turned inward after an instant, though. I gripped my phone till the edges dug into my hand like a hot coal. I'd messed up enough. I couldn't delay any further. Dad, can you email me Grandma's recipe? I asked. I need it to help me get over tomorrow, to focus on my studies. He drew in a ragged breath, fragile, close to breaking. I took the guilt from that breath and fed it into my grandmother's funeral pyre. The only thing which mattered here was whether he'd think fast enough, whether he'd figure out what I wanted to do. Fine, he said, so swift I knew he wanted to move on. Then he hung up on me. That night I began. Flour and water, sugar and salt, yeast, and my grandmother's secret ingredients. Kneading by hand in the dorm kitchen till my back ached, the clock slipping on and on and on, the dough rising, the oven blinking, bread. The bread had finished, and the morning of my grandmother's funeral had begun. I skipped my philosophy class the day of my grandma's funeral. I ignored the classics journal meeting and the debate club. I set aside readings, information slipping through my fingers like sand, and let my history assignment wink out on my Canvas page, undone. Friends texted me, and I didn't text back. My dad texted me, and I didn't even read it. I followed my memories from class expedition and exhausted observations of the ghosts at night on the quad. I found the portal. It lay behind the abandoned chapel on the east side of campus. A little pool surrounded by gray stones which glowed a numinous white at night. I knelt before it, clutched the bread to my chest, forgot every warning I'd ever heard about visiting that other realm, and dove inside. By the time I graduated high school, my grandmother was nearing the end. She used to visit my family in the city every year. My high school graduation was the last time she came. She was sick and silent the whole visit, face slick with sweat. My grandfather rubbed her back and sat by her and brought her plates with olives on them, broad shoulders hunched and bearded face crinkled in a sad smile. He reminded me of an aged bear. He didn't have her fine education or wealthy family. He came from portal guide stock, a carpenter in an age of metal and factories. I remember him hefting saws in the workshed, grinding at soft maple or hard oak. When my father became Catholic, my grandmother raged. My grandfather whittled him a little olive wood crucifix that still hangs in his room. Toward the end of my graduation ceremony, the headmaster announced my national award-winning essay on Shadowland Studies to the crowd. I'd spent all senior year slaving away at it, teaching myself Latin and combing through gravestone inscriptions. I'd never been so proud before. In the audience, my father scowled. He muttered something to my mother, something sharp and audible even through the crowd. Something I'd rather not remember. At the reception afterwards, I lurked by the snack table and wondered if it was selfish not to change my course of study. If it hurt him so much for me to be me, then why couldn't I just become someone else? "Sounds like you wrote a good essay," my grandmother said, leaning on her cane at the doorway to the back room. Her voice was a ragged rasp, and her knuckles gripped white over the cane's top, but she smiled at me anyway. The teeth-gritted smile of the old. Old age ain't for sissies, she used to say a lot. I never told her about my later research, about the time I cited one of her discoveries in a paper. I never saw her again after that. Our conversations on the phone were sparse. She often mixed me up with my father. Once, midway through my first year of college, she began apologizing to me, saying that she loved me even if I went to that church, even if... My grandfather took the phone and returned me to the easier topic of my classes and his carpentry, the small talk of two people who know the third in the room is slipping away. The Shadowlands are all places and no places. There, location and person are mingled. Your chosen item carries you to the part of the beach where your loved one once was, and you wait there for them. Bone-white sand, a shifting sky above, and obsidian-black waves as far as the eye can see. You sit on the sand and you think about death and you wait. For hours, which seem like years, you wait. She had gone already. I should have known she had left. She hadn't stayed on the beach to ponder anything. She hadn't tried, like the ghosts, to struggle back. She had sailed her coracle over the sea, and she hadn't thought to return. That's more common than you'd think. Despite what we say, most times it is the living who haunt the dead, not the other way around. I waited for her anyway. Others had waited too. They'd left marks on the sand, footsteps on the shore, little items strewn by the waterline. A small aspen dove, a torn page from a Sylvia Plath book, a flower. And now, I alone was left, I and my bread, without the soul I'd baked it for. I waited all night, till my blood slowed in my veins and the world felt translucent. My professor emailed me about my missing assignment, and my friends texted me, and I waited, and I waited. My dad called once, twice, thrice. He'd figured out my decision, and it didn't even matter anymore. I left him on voicemail, unheard. What could he say to me, except what I already knew, that I'd failed him and Grandma both at once, and now, for one of those failures, no remedy remained? I waited, and she didn't come. I couldn't apologize to her. I couldn't call her again because she was gone. I couldn't ask her if she had gotten the chance to apologize to my father. I couldn't tell her I loved her. I couldn't thank her for saying, in as few words as she had, that it was okay for me to study what I wanted, that she loved me anyway. I waited, and at last, at the crack of midnight, I went to those waves, and I dove in. The water there is cold, so cold it claws into your bones. Your breath leaves you and you feel the weight of souls around you. The living are not meant to swim in the ocean of the Shadowlands, and you know that. You know that, and you swim anyway. You don't care anymore. Life is noise and blather and nothing. In death lie all the realities life hid. The words you never said, the feelings you were too stupid to bring to the surface. Death lies past the ocean of the Shadowlands, and if you can swim far enough, fast enough, maybe you'll reach it, and you'll be able to say all the words it's too late to let out. I love you, Grandma. I love you, and I'm sorry, and I meant to call you. I did. I wish I had called you. I wish so much that I had. I swam, and I swam, and I swam, and I tried to get away. I tried so hard, and for a moment, I thought I'd succeeded. The bread flew from my hand into the crushing water, and where the waves tore it, I thought I glimpsed the water part. Far past the gray veil of the water parting, I thought I saw a tall woman, smiling. Her hands were dark with soil. She wasn't smiling at me. She was smiling at something else, someone else. She had found a place far away, and I wasn't in it. And I wanted her to come back with a selfishness and a need harsher than love. I wanted her to come back so I could say I was sorry, so she could say all over again that she loved me. Someone caught me. Warmth, the bitter, scorching warmth of life. They dragged me back to shore and into their arms, strong, soft arms around me, and the press of a cross against my forehead, and my father's sobs over me. "It's okay," he said. "It's okay, I know, but she's gone, and she forgives us, and we have to forgive her." We hugged each other on that beach, my father and I, and we cried together. "I love you," he said. "I love you, and I want you to be happy, to study whatever you want. Please, stay here with me."
In my day job, I see a lot of students. Some of them breeze through their studies, but many don't, and I really don't think it's as easy as it used to be. There's the worry of debt, of finding a job, finding friends, whether you belong or not. COVID and the interruptions to schooling have added extra pressures. There's a palpable sense of exhaustion in graduating students. On top of that, many struggle with the weight of expectations on them, whether their own or their families, while others have to forge their independence in isolation due to distance or estrangement. This story really resonated with me in how it showed that liminality between expectations and independence, freedom and family ties, desire to do what's right for us, and a desire to please those we love most. It also shows that even where the gap between parent and child grows large, if anything can bridge it, it's love. The closing paragraphs here are beautiful. Our paths may not lead us where our families want or expect, but a good parent will know when to let go and let us find our own way. We, in turn, will one day have to face the world with only our memories of them. I hope this story inspires you to strive for your own goals, to be your own person, and that your own support network is there for you when you need them the most. Join us again soon. We love bringing you the best audio fiction week after week, but we can't do it without your support. Your donations pay our authors, our narrators, our servers, and our staff. Please consider supporting us with a monthly donation through either PayPal or Patreon. You can also review us on Apple Podcasts, request us on Spotify, and consider the stories we publish for award consideration. There are lots of ways you can help. Join the discussion on the EA Forum, forum.escapeartist.net, or EA Discord. Visit on Twitter at Cast of Wonders. Come say hello. Cast of Wonders is brought to you by editor Catherine Inskip, assistant editors Kat Percob and Alicia Caparaso, associate editors Tanya Adelit, Amy Brennan, Joyce Hernandez, Somtoa Haseway, Amanda Kong, Ray O, Simon Pan, Samuel Poots, Emma Smales, Denise Sudell, and Rin Yu. Our editorial assistant is Amy Brennan, our community manager is Denise Sudell, and our audio producer is Jeremy Carter. Cast of Wonders is part of the Escape Artists Foundation, a 501c3 non-profit, and this episode is distributed under the Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 4.0 International License. That means you can download or listen to the episode on any device you like, but you can't change it or sell it. Our theme music is Appeal to Heavens by Alexei Nov, available from Promo DJ or his Facebook page. Thank you for listening.